Welcome to Anti-Fiction. This is a weekly nonfiction podcast where each week I, Christian Yates, select a theme, and then I invite two guest hosts to come and talk about stories relating to that theme. My guest hosts this week are Mike Yates.
What's up?
And Andy Mattingly.
Hello.
And our topic today is ghosts. Welcome to the first part of the spookiest month of anti-fiction, until probably next October, and then we'll probably do this again. So, but anyway, so ghosts is our topic today, and I picked a story. I've been trying to find some more international stories because I've been realizing that I've been focusing a lot on stories from the United States. But there are so many other countries out there, guys. Did you know that?
It was like 3 or 4, right?
There's like
7 countries.
7 other countries.
there's like no fewer than 7 other countries. So anyway, so this is a story from China. This is it's Chaonei number 81 is the name of the building. It's a haunted house in Beijing. It's described as Beijing's most celebrated haunted house. So the building itself, Chaonei number 81, was built probably in 1910. We don't know that for certain because building records from before 1949 in China are inconsistent or incomplete because of the Chinese Civil War and then the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Evidently, a lot of like information on buildings fucking went missing during that time. But it was believed that the building was meant to serve as a school in order to teach Mandarin to Western missionaries. So as far as the spooky stuff associated with Chaonei number 81, there are several stories of disappearances involving the mansion. So in one of these stories, the British priest who had initiated the construction of the building, supposedly in order to use it as a church, was said to have gone missing before construction was finished. And in 2001, a group of workmen doing construction on a neighboring building got drunk and decided to tear down the wall that separated the basement that they were working on from the basement of Chaonei number 81. And so they break down the wall, they go through to the mansion, and they're never seen again.
That is some next level DIY.
Right? Yeah.
That's also when I do all my DIY is late at night when I'm drunk. And I'm
Yes.
like, ooh, you know what I should do?
I should tear down this basement wall and get to the neighboring basement.
Well, we could
You
share a twice as large basement. I don't see what they would be upset about.
Well, mostly probably that you could get up into the house, I guess.
Now we have a twice as large house we share.
That's fair.
It's our house.
If you live outside,
comrades.
you have the biggest house.
Well, but I mean, and I mean, that is a very communist type ideal, I suppose. So, you know, sure, why not? Let's do it. So anyway, so they were never seen again. So it's also said that people walking by the house experience an uneasy feeling of dread and fear, and that also that even in the summer, the mansion's doorway is cooler than neighboring buildings. Right? It doesn't sound
sweet.
Right? That sounds all right to me. That sounds like,
Yeah, I'm
oh
not
man,
upset.
it's fucking hot out. I'm
Let's
gonna
go stand in that doorway.
Stand in this haunted mansion's doorway.
It's cooler than all the other ones.
Oh, yeah.
That's fucking dope.
Yeah,
No.
there you go.
That kind of thing.
Both kind of cool.
So none of that is particularly spooky.
That's
Right.
Like, that's
There's some
fine.
disappearances. There's, it's a little bit chillier in the mansion
So far,
doorway.
I would stay in that mansion overnight.
Right, sure, absolutely. You might never be seen again, but
Win-win. Leaving all my responsibilities behind.
But so the most popular story associated with Chownay number 81 is that of an officer in the National Revolutionary Army. So during the second part of the Chinese Civil War, he was an officer in the National Revolutionary Army. But then, in advance of the communist victory at the end of the war, he fled to Taiwan, leaving behind his wife, who was evidently so devastated by being left behind that she hanged herself from the rafters and now haunts the property.
Oh.
Other accounts of that particular story say that the outcome of the war had nothing to do with her suicide, and that she was simply lonely while her husband was away so often in the war, which doesn't make much sense. I feel like being left behind is a more devastating blow than my husband's fighting a war and I'm going to hang myself.
No, you
I
can see
guess.
both.
So, local legend says that during thunderstorms, you can still hear her screaming in the empty house.
Man, that's convenient that it's only when there's a ton of fucking other noise going on.
Right? Yeah. Although, from what I've read, people say that people sneak into the house and then
And scream during
during
thunderstorms.
thunderstorms. And that is what that is
Sounds
from.
like something I'd do.
That is
Just
incredible.
kidding. I would never do that, actually.
I wouldn't do it,
That
but
is too much commitment to a
yeah.
bit that I'm not
Right.
willing to
That's a
put
lot
out.
of commitment.
Like every
but-
time there's a
so-
thunderstorm, you're like, oh shit,
Oh,
I
my
gotta
time
go
has
get to that
come. I
haunted
know what
house
I
real
have to
quick.
do.
Sorry, guys.
Can you take over dinner for me? Because I gotta.
yeah,
I gotta go scream in a mansion.
right. There's not much time.
Do
I
they
don't
set
know
up
how long this storm's gonna
like
last.
the Naruto runs and
Yeah.
Goku
Yes.
streams? They set up those events on Facebook. And it's like
Right.
ghosts screaming in a haunted mansion.
Yeah, it's a flash mob. So the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association, to whom the property was transferred in 1994, says that there are no records of any officer ever having lived in the house. Although, again, the building records prior to 1949 are incomplete or missing. So the
So
people
they're
who
not
own the
lying.
building now are like, there's no record of it. And I'm like, there's no record of any of it.
Yeah.
We don't know
Where
for
was
sure when
this?
it was built. This is Beijing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So,
It's entirely possible.
right, so they're like, it's not haunted. There's not, that local legend has no proof to it whatsoever. But, like, also no proof of the building ever has any record of it. So,
I mean,
but,
they're not wrong, at least.
right, yeah, they're not wrong. So they had scheduled the building for demolition in the late 1990s, but later canceled those plans. It's believed that the demolition was canceled due to the incident with the construction workers in 2001, although the CPCA claims that the diocese had interest in the building, and that's why they didn't demolish it. But it has since become a historical landmark. The property, however, is considered impossible to sell or lease because of the Chinese superstition surrounding death. I feel like that's a worldwide superstition.
Oh yeah, nobody wants to live in a house that somebody killed themselves.
Right.
in. Or is haunted.
But in China, that superstition is like really hardcore.
Oh.
I don't know if you're familiar with like the superstition surrounding the number 4 in China.
I've
No.
heard of it, but I don't remember the details of it.
Because
anymore.
so the Chinese word for 4 and the
It's really
Chinese
close
word
to
for
death.
death
Yeah.
are pronounced very similarly. So there's superstitions surrounding that. So like nobody wants to buy or lease this house from the CPCA because maybe somebody might have died in it. So
I feel the same way.
right. But anyway, so that's the story of Chownay number 81. It's a small story. I wasn't able to find like a whole lot of local lore on the actual ghost that haunts the mansion, but because most of it was in actual Mandarin, and I couldn't get Google Translate to translate the pages for me. Yeah, that's the story of Chownay number 81.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So Mike, what have you brought for us?
A bit of an anthology. My stories are more revolved around haunted locations,
Okay.
right? This is an article off of Reader's Digest. it's entitled 10 True Ghost Stories from the Most Haunted Places in the World, if anyone is interested in checking it out. So I will apologize in advance if I butcher any of these words, because the first one is from Serbia.
Okay.
So, and Eastern European languages and names and stuff are really hard to pronounce if you don't know them, in case anyone didn't know that already. All right, so this one is from Kiseljevo, Serbia. This remote village is home to less than 800 inhabitants and one spooky vampire story.
Okay.
In 1725, a resident named Peter Plugajovich passed away, and in the next 8 days, 9 deaths occurred.
Okay.
The 9 who died had said on their deathbeds that they had been throttled by Plugajovich, the Peter's corpse. Let's call him Peter. That's way easier. Right. Priests and officials flocked to Kiseljevo to investigate, and roughly 40 days after Peter had expired, they exhumed his grave. Strangely, his beard and nails still seemed to be growing, and there were signs of new skin. When a stake was plunged into his body, it was reported that fresh blood spurted from his ears and mouth, a horrible scream arose, and his skin turned black. At that point, the murder ceased. Some called him the first vampire, which may be more chilling than any other true ghost stories. Which I would agree.
Oh no.
That's assuming true.
Is this where you're starting? Because I'm like.
That's where I'm starting.
Sweating.
Not all of them are about vampires.
Okay.
Because the next one is about the Forbidden City in China.
Okay.
The beautiful, sprawling Forbidden City in Beijing, made up of 980 buildings on 100 acres, is one of China's best-known landmarks. Mm-hmm. Many true ghost stories have also come from within its walls. From the 15th century through the early 20th century, the Chinese emperor lived there, but now it's rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of concubines. In 1421, Emperor Yongle ordered nearly 3,000 ladies-in-waiting associated with his harem, all of whom lived in the Forbidden City, to be slaughtered because he thought that a beloved concubine had been poisoned.
What? So...
Yeah, he thought his favorite one had been poisoned, and that one of the other ones did it.
So he was going to kill all of them.
But he didn't know who, so he just had
killed them all.
Killed.
All right, sure.
He spared some of his favorites in the harem, but on the day of his funeral, 16 courtesans were hung with nooses of... Hanged, is what it should say. With nooses of white silk. Come on, Reader's Digest, get your shit together. Today in the Forbidden City, a lady with black hair has been seen running from a ghostly soldier. Sounds of screaming, weeping, and sword fighting have been heard, and specters of dead bodies, pools of blood, and pieces of white silk have been glimpsed. The Forbidden City is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's open to the public, although it closes before nightfall, in case anyone is going to Beijing and wants to visit.
I do not.
Yeah, no, I'm good to stay away from the ghosts, if I'm being honest.
Man, what kind of ghost hunter? You're not a ghost hunter.
Nope. I just do a podcast where we talk about ghosts sometimes.
Next up, we have Glamis Castle in Scotland. This castle was built in the 14th century, and it's where the Queen Mother, the late mother to Queen Elizabeth II, grew up. It's also said to be populated by a bevy of ghosts, including the Grey Lady, or the Lady of Glamis, otherwise known as Lady Janet Douglas. Accused of murdering her husband by poisoning him and of using witchcraft to take down King James V of Scotland, the Grey Lady was burned at the stake in 1537 in Edinburgh. Her ghost is said to run up the stairs in the clock tower, leaving a trail of ash in her wake. A woman with no tongue has been seen roaming the park around the castle, and the ghost of an 18th century boy servant who had been terribly mistreated is said to haunt a seat near the door of the Queen's bedroom. The most famous ghost is Earl Beardy, or the Earl of Crawford.
Earl Beardy. I hope he had just a glorious beard.
That is not the most Scottish name. I don't know what is. This noble visited the castle in the 15th century, and one night he got drunk and demanded that someone play cards with him, as you do when you get drunk.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like, let's play cards.
Man, I'm starting to feel that like my embarrassing drunk things are actually universal, and I'm getting less and less embarrassed.
Yeah. No, everyone's an asshole when they're drunk. But it's just, what kind of asshole are you?
Right. I'm just a card playing
Yeah,
asshole.
he's a card player. It's like he didn't even declare war on anyone,
Right,
or just wantonly murder people.
Somebody's about to play cards with me right the fuck now.
We're playing spades right now.
Continuing. If no one would, the Earl declared, he would play the devil himself. A mysterious hooded man dressed in black showed up at Glamis and offered to play. By the next morning, the Earl had vanished, and visitors to the castle have reported hearing swearing, loud voices, dice, and clinking glasses. Honestly, I don't think he got that bad of a deal then, because it sounds like he's having a good old time.
Yeah, he's just still playing cards with the devil.
Yeah, still playing cards with the devil.
And clearly,
he's like, Beardy, you cheat. No, I don't, devil.
Yeah, he's like, clearly the devil's a good opponent if he's still like swearing and playing after all this.
You want to complain about me hiding cards up my sleeves, but you're hiding them in a different dimension and then just pulling them out at will.
Okay. Next we have Cumae Archaeological Park in Italy, located on the southwestern coast of Italy and settled in the 8th century BC. Cumae was the first Greek colony on the Italian mainland. It is best known for being the seat of the Cumaean Sibyl, or prophetess. In the Aeneid, Aeneas went to see the Sibyl before he entered the underworld. A passage to hell is located nearby. Cumae has been the site of much bloodshed. In the 1st century, several brutal battles in the Gothic Wars took place there, and during World War II, German soldiers used a part of it as a bunker and gun emplacement. Modern-day visitors can traverse the dark womb-like tunnels and try their luck at consulting the Sibyl for guidance. And fend off Nazi zombies.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Next, we have the Monte Cristo homestead in Australia. Said to be Australia's most haunted house, this isolated residence was built on a hillside in New South Wales in 1884 by farmer Christopher Crawley. After he died in 1920, his wife, Elizabeth, became a Bible-immersed recluse, leaving the house only twice before she passed away. Her ghost is thought to walk the rooms, and visitors report feeling an ice-cold chill when she shows up, sometimes holding a silver cross. She has quite a bit of company, including these spirits, a maid who had plunged to her death from a balcony in the house, a stable boy who was burned to death by his master, and a mentally disabled man who was chained in the caretaker's cottage for 40 years.
Shit.
Naturally, the latter ghost makes his presence felt by clanking his chains.
Well, as you do
Obviously.
when you're a chain ghost.
That's wrong with that. Not to make light of it, but I'm making light of it. All right, we have Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. So Philadelphia is Eastern State Penitentiary was home to some of the country's most notorious criminals, and 150 years ago, the punishments themselves were enough to give you chills. Not only was it one of the first prisons to institute solitary confinement, which led to insanity, but prisoners also were left wet in the cold until ice formed on their bodies, or given an iron gag that made their tongues bleed.
Shit.
Jesus Christ.
In the 1990s, a locksmith was helping restore a cell when he says a negative energy overcame him and left him temporarily paralyzed before he saw visions of faces appear on the wall. I don't remember that happening with Martin Lee in Spider-Man. I don't remember that being one of his powers. Anyways, since then, countless other true ghost stories have emerged from visitors who have reported seeing shadowy figures or hearing eerie giggles, whispers, and walls. I personally find that to be way scarier than anything else. Just
like the whispers,
disembodied whispers and laughter.
Oh, yeah.
And laughter and stuff.
Yeah,
That's
laughter
the worst.
is like the scariest thing when you don't know where it's coming
Yeah,
from.
I'd rather just have like Michael Myers in front of me.
Yes.
And everything like
Right.
It's like there's the
I would
threat.
honestly-
I see the threat.
I would rather, if it was disembodied, I'd rather hear someone screaming because, like, yeah, that tracks. The ghost is screaming. But if they're laughing, that's, like, way worse.
Right, they're like, all right, what have you done? What did you poison? What did you booby trap? It's kind of like I feel like when you can see the ghost, you know, I feel like that's scarier than like if like a door just closes or something or a drawer opens, you know, something like that, like where you're not seeing the actual spirit itself.
See, it's the physical stuff that doesn't even scare me. It's always the more auditory.
Yeah.
It's the disembodied part of it. I
Right.
think that gets me because it's like I can't identify the threat. So
That's fair.
I have no way to even possibly prepare for this. And that's what I don't like. So here we are. Next up, we have a pretty kind of one.
Happy-go-lucky ghost
Well,
story.
I mean, like, oh, hey, look at that. It's a real thing. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Nestled in the Rocky Mountains, the Stanley Hotel would seem like a romantic getaway with breathtaking views if it didn't also have a reputation for the true ghost stories that inspired The Shining.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In 1911, a housekeeper lit a candle in a room that had a gas leak, causing an explosion that destroyed a tenth of the hotel. The woman lived, but guests claim her spirit has unpacked their beds or done the sheets around them while they were sleeping. There's worse things I think a ghost could do. That's actually really
Yeah,
nice.
right.
I'm actually,
What a
it's like,
helpful ass
thank
ghost.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're such a nice, swell person. Dedicated to your job even long after you died.
Dedicated.
Ah.
I feel like I stuck the
Michael
landing on that
hates
one.
puns.
I hate not clever puns.
That's true.
I feel like that was very
I'd
clever.
rather you put some effort into your jokes.
Yeah, we talked about this right before we started recording.
And it's like, I
Well,
found
Michael
out,
has a very high
I found out that I
puns.
don't hate puns. I just hate lazy puns, which is the majority of puns people make.
Which are the best puns.
I feel like that wasn't lazy.
That was lazy.
You don't think so?
You did nothing. You did absolutely nothing to get that
just said
joke
the
across.
word again.
You just said the word across and just emphasized the first syllable.
Yeah, it took a lot of effort. It wasn't lazy.
I'd
Listen,
hate to see what you did.
or listeners, you help me out on this one. I'd
hate to see
send
what
us
you
an
call
email
low effort.
calling Michael out on his bullshit.
I'd hate to see what you call low effort then, if you think that's high effort. Anyways. Yeah, so others, also at the Stanley Hotel, others hear piano music without a player or children's footsteps on the floor that was once used for childcare. In 2017, a man on a ghost tour supposedly captured 2 little girls on film, despite there being no young girls in the room.
Ooh, spoopy.
That just almost sounds more like you're trying to see, like, yep, The Shining, it's real.
Right, yeah.
So, like, I mean, if it hadn't been that specific, then I'd be more inclined to believe
Well,
it.
was that before or after The Shining?
This is 2017.
Oh.
It's even after the crappy 90s remake,
Oh.
where the guy doesn't get killed with an axe. He just gets hit in the head with a croquet mallet and lives.
What? There's 2 Shinings?
Yeah, there was a TV made movie that was really bad.
Listen,
from
I
the
know I
90s.
said I was going to watch The Shining like 3 episodes ago, but I have not done that since then or even thought about it. And now there's 2 of them, so I feel like my workload is doubled.
The only one you need to watch is the one with Jack Nicholson.
Okay.
I don't know who the actors are in the other one, but it was a direct-to-TV movie and it was
Jack
garbage.
Nicholson is, so that doesn't help me.
You've seen him in
Trust
other
me,
stuff,
you'll
I'm
know.
sure.
Okay.
You'll know because when you start watching The Shining, if you're like, this sucks, then I think you picked the wrong one.
Okay. All right.
Next up, you got Rose Hall in Jamaica. According to local lore, Annie Palmer, the wife of plantation owner John Palmer, had a dark streak beyond the black magic she practiced. In the 1800s, she murdered John, her second and third husbands, and numerous male slaves whom she'd taken as lovers. She finally met her match in a slave who also practiced magic and brought her to her demise, ending her killing spree. Although historians have cast doubt on the legitimacy of the story, Rose Hall visitors have claimed to come across the ghost of the White Witch. In the early 2000s, one medium visiting Rose Hall reportedly fell into a trance soon after arriving, and the ghost took over her body.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, pretty interesting.
I do not believe that for a second.
Which part?
That a ghost took over? Honestly,
Yeah.
any of it. I don't believe any
Honestly,
of it.
any of it.
And he doesn't believe in
These
ghosts.
are ghost stories. Now we have a French word. Chateau de Brissac.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
in
probably how you
France.
pronounce it.
One night, I know chateau is right.
Yeah, chateau.
So, the other one was pretty simple and straightforward, but it also is French, so it's probably pronounced very differently than I think.
Possibly.
Anyways, one night in 1477, a stately castle in France became the site of a double murder. King Louis XI's half-sister Charlotte de Valois was married to Jacques de Jacques is his first name, who learned from a servant one night that his wife was in bed with another man upstairs. Jacques ran upstairs and killed both lovers with a sword, metal, choosing to wear green, his late wife's favorite color, to the funeral instead of black. Since then, visitors have reported catching sight of a green lady haunting the halls in her signature color.
Oh.
Wow.
If you're going to do it,
Yeah.
use a sword.
Obviously.
That way, at least it's an honorable death.
And you'll still be able to enter Valhalla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to get into Valhalla, you just have to die with a sword in your hand, so you don't have to necessarily have killed anyone else.
That's fair.
Yeah. But that just reminds me of the guy from World War II, I think he was Scottish, who carried a longbow and a broadsword into battle. He stormed the beaches of Normandy with a sword and a bow.
Wow.
And it was awesome.
That's very Scottish.
That is quite possibly one of the most ballsiest people to ever exist.
Probably, yeah.
He actually is he is the most recent confirmed kill with a longbow, and he had 2 confirmed kills with a longbow in World War II.
Nice.
Wow.
So whenever we do our war stories episode,
Yeah, there you go.
I won't do that one because I've already told you the story.
Because I just did it.
All right, and last on my list is Woodchester Mansion in England. Builders hard at work on Woodchester Mansion mysteriously abandoned the project in 1868, leaving tools behind and rooms unfinished. Today, it's considered one of England's most haunted places, with rumors of floating coffins, headless horses, and feelings of intense deja vu. If I knew that constituted paranormal activity, then man, do I have some places to tell you about. Literally anywhere I've ever been. It's all haunted, man. Staff claim they felt their hair being pulled by phantom forces before their cameras mysteriously turned off.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
convenient.
Before, yeah. So yeah, those are my stories. More about places that are haunted,
Right.
and relatively true things that go along with those legends.
That's some of those are very weird.
Some of them are like the fucking vampire guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like that one.
And the voodoo witch.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
Those were awesome, though. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I aim to please.
Yeah. Andy, I understand that you have done something a little different from the regular format.
Yeah, and that was a ridiculously high bar to set. So surprisingly.
All right, so I have done no research, but I have an article of someone who did a good amount of research.
Okay, cool.
Which is the same thing as you doing the research.
Right. I read the article of somebody who did a bunch of research.
So
That's exactly what I did.
I have. Okay, yeah, I feel good about it. Well, I don't know. I don't research this stuff. I'm not like an anthropologist or whatever, so I don't.
I don't even think I knew I was on this one until yesterday.
That is probably true.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about. Okay, so I should start this out with, I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe that there's an afterlife. So
well,
it would make sense. Oh, that's nice of them. So it would make sense then that I do not believe that ghosts exist. So I want to talk about a few different reasons researchers think we see ghosts.
Okay.
And then I guess just see what you guys think.
I think you're wrong.
Yeah, well,
based on everything you've said so far.
So this is the beliefs of a man named Christopher French. He is, this is a big word I'm about to say, so don't laugh at me. The founder of the Animalistic Psychology Research Unit. Animalistic looked more daunting before I said it.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
At Goldsmiths University at the University of London.
That one I'm gonna laugh at you for.
Yeah, because I said Godsmith instead of Goldsmith. Yeah, I was on that high of saying animalistic.
It's like,
right?
That's a hard one, and then you're just like, oh no, I messed up the easy one.
And I was like, now what is this word? THE. It says. Okay.
The.
Yeah, I think that's it. Teehee. University of London. All right. So, Christopher French says that most of the time when people think they've seen a ghost, they haven't really seen anything, which I think, I agree with that so far. I'm on board. But they will also say, and I think both of you touched on this a little bit, that they don't even actually think they've seen anything. What they'll refer to is a strong presence, or like the scent of the perfume their wife used to wear or something like that. And they're like, I've seen a ghost. But a lot of the times people have not even visually seen the ghost.
Right. It's like with what I was saying in my story with like that
uneasy
feeling.
Yeah.
Like if you hear that if you're alone in a house, if you've ever been alone in a house
and felt like somebody,
and then like just a thought popped into your head that's a little bit creepy, and then immediately you're like on edge.
Bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he talks about the different way that non-clinical people hallucinate. And so the most common one he talks about is sleep paralysis.
Okay.
And so I am like not going to tell the story because it's extremely private. But I've talked to a friend of mine before about whether or not we believe in ghosts, and I said no, and he said that he definitely did believe in ghosts because he's seen the ghost of his grandfather like in person. And it was like late at night, and it was in his bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I thought about for a long time. But when we talked about that, we were teenagers, and I have never experienced sleep paralysis, and I was not familiar with the concept. But I did think back on it later when I learned about sleep paralysis. And that's what Christopher French is saying here, is that about 8% of the general population suffer from basic sleep paralysis at least once in their life,
Okay.
which is like a lot of people.
Yeah.
8% of everyone
Right.
is a lot of people. And then some other groups experience it at a higher rate. So the examples he uses are psychiatric patients and students suffer from sleep paralysis at a higher rate than the general population. So if you don't know what sleep paralysis is, it's when you're like sort of falling asleep or sort of waking up. So you're in that middle in between sort of area. And you're paralyzed. You can't move. And so it's like, from what I understand, like frightening, like you can't, you know what I mean? Because you're unable to move. But a lot of times while that's happening, your brain is trying to figure out why it's happening. And so it starts filling in the blanks for you. And a lot of like the things we're going to talk about after this are about that, about how your brain fills in the blanks for you. So while you're laying there and can't move and you're half awake, oftentimes your brain will tell you that somebody's holding you down. You'll start to be able to feel breath on the back of your neck. A lot of people who experience sleep paralysis will like see something like standing in the corner of their room, like a shadow or something like that. It's not uncommon to hallucinate sounds like footsteps, or like whispers, stuff like that. And so because sleep paralysis is so common like that, but because it's not like a well-known phenomenon, a lot of people will attribute that to something supernatural. So that is Christopher French's belief on why people think they see ghosts. Have either of you experienced sleep paralysis?
I think I have, yeah.
I don't know for certain, but I guess that's kind of the idea, right? Is like you don't necessarily understand that you're experiencing sleep paralysis
when it happens.
Probably
the first time, because I do have a friend who like has it pretty frequently.
Right.
Like when she's stressed, she like definitely will happen to her, and now she knows what it's like. And so while it's happening, she doesn't. I don't think that she knows, but after when she wakes up, she's able to be like, oh yeah, that was sleep paralysis. There was not a creepy demon in my room.
But maybe there was, you know.
All the evidence points towards no.
I mean, I did hear. Actually, I think it was in an episode of Black Mirror they talked about this. Is where I heard it first. But the idea being that, like, 100 and some years ago, where they didn't have a lot of like modern kind of distraction. Like we've got like constantly like our phones are on us or our TV is on, our radio's on something, but like 150 years ago you didn't have all that distraction, and so like the brain came up with ways to stimulate itself, and one of those was to let the imagination run wild. And that's why people thought they saw ghosts, is because their brain was like, what the fuck else do I have to do? So
right. That's interesting. I don't know. I've never heard of that before.
I mean,
but
sleep
it makes
paralysis
sense.
sounds more likely if
Yeah.
8% of people always are
Yeah.
like experiencing it at least once in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But because that's like 700 million people.
I don't
Give or
know.
take. I think the world population is somewhere around 7 billion now. So.
Right. So 8% will be just under 700 million.
It's a lot of people.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
It's
Too
quite
many
a few.
people, depending on who you ask.
It's a very loud motorcycle outside.
Do you think it's picking it up?
It probably.
It might be.
Yeah, we got all the doors and windows open, so
Yeah.
it's a nice spring day outside. So
Stop it.
Hey, we got to relish this. We didn't get a spring this year.
That's
Right.
true. Yeah, it was cold and then got real hot right away.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I remember I immediately went from walking out to my car after work and scraping snow off of it to it being 75 degrees the next
Yeah.
week. It's like,
I think we talked about that on post show last time.
yeah, probably.
All right. So this next point I'm going to bring up is a man named Michael Neese, Nees.
Okay.
Not like your sibling's daughter. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology, Human Factors, Perception, and Cognition Lab at Lafayette College. So he has a very poetic way of talking, and it's very difficult to summarize what he's saying.
Right,
so I'm just going to say that. Yeah.
He writes all of his papers in iambic pentameter.
And he just makes up words.
Yeah, but also, I guess what I'm trying to get at is he said a lot of words.
Gotcha.
And so I'm not just going to read it because that would
take
take a good amount of time.
Words.
He maybe got paid by the word.
I'm gonna pick the good words and leave out all the other ones.
I would
and
recommend.
Then you just end up with an incoherent sentence.
I think when this episode gets posted, I'm going to go ahead and link this article if you guys want to link your information too, because I do think it's worth it to actually read through what they're saying, because I'm just summarizing it, and so if my understanding is different than what they're actually saying, that's important too. But what they have to say, I think, is very interesting. Not just from the ghost perspective.
But also from the ghost perspective.
Right. But also, I'm staying on theme, I swear. Yeah. So Michael Neese talks about how limited and incomplete the inputs we get from what's going on around us is. So how we perceive things is based on everything that's ever happened to us in our whole life.
Right.
And so that's just, you're adding on to that every single second. And so when you see or mishear, or your sensory perceptions don't exactly know what's going on, your brain uses everything it's learned from everything that's ever happened to you to fill in the blanks, to fill those gaps. And so we have those internal biases is what he calls it, internal biases and expectations is what he says. And so he talks about, sorry, let me find it real quick. This thing called pareidolia, which is, this is a quote, is the name for a common category of misperceptions that occur when a random, i.e. inherently meaningless, perceptual experience is interpreted to have meaning. So the classic example he uses is seeing Jesus's face in a piece of toast.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just seeing, the human brain picks up patterns, we're attracted to patterns. And so on top of that,
it's kind of like seeing a bunny in the cloud.
Right. And
or
so
a potato chip that looks like a duck.
There you go.
Yes. So he takes it a step further in reference to ghosts, is that just from an evolutionary perspective, we tend to see humanoid figures and things that we don't understand, because it's safer to think it's a human and it's not than to think it's not a human and now that person can attack you. Right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Right.
So then when we see things like a lamp post with a jacket on it in the dark, our first thought is not that is where I said a lamp post because I'm looking at the lamp behind you, but I was thinking coat rack.
Right.
But then I looked at the lamp. That would be weird.
I was like, a lamp
This
post
podcast
in the
is now
jacket.
dated. Whenever if this ever gets dug up after civilization falls, they'll know exactly when this happened.
They're gonna
based on
yeah.
the
That
meme reference we just
meme.
made.
Okay, so what I meant to say was a coat rack with a jacket on it.
Right.
At night, instead of thinking that's where I always have my coat rack, you're probably going to think that's an intruder.
I'm going to stab them with a sword.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to stab that coat rack with a sword right now. And so people who are then on top of that evolutionary trait that we all have, if you are inclined to believe in the supernatural, then when that happens to you, you're not going to necessarily think that's a person. So I just said that's my internal bias, is I was even though that's not happening to me right now, I would think that was an intruder, because I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and stuff like that. I have a lot of anxiety about somebody breaking into my house, and what will I do? All the time I'm thinking about that.
I know.
And so if somebody was not so true crimey and instead were more interested in supernatural things and stuff of that, they would see that and think it was a ghost.
Right. Okay.
And so because you're already biased that way on top of that evolutionary trait, and you see things you can't explain, you're probably going to attribute it to the supernatural.
That's why,
and not just sight. So sounds,
Yeah.
all
Right.
That's why I keep a baseball bat, a combat knife, and a machete stashed around my house.
Listen, can I tell you, our roommate...
Just in case you've got to kill a ghost with a machete.
No, I mean an actual person.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah, so, like, our roommate was, like, woke me up, I mean, this was a couple months ago, and was like, there's something in the basement. And I was, like, halfway down the basement steps with a butcher knife when I was like, what am I going to do with this? What is, you know what I mean? I'm not going to use this. I'm
Right.
going to turn around and run.
Well, but,
And if I have this, I might trip and kill myself.
Right, yeah, no, I'm more likely to injure myself with this right now. And then it turned out to be...
The dryer?
No, it was an animal outside that he thought was, like, in the basement. I don't know. It was a whole thing. But it was very late at night. I would have thought the same thing for sure.
I love how he woke you up, though, to do that instead of, like, I'm going to send Andy down the steps with a butcher knife instead of going down myself with a butcher knife.
Well, he was behind me. I had backup.
Okay, so if you turn around, tripped, and fell, you would
dumb.
kill him instead of
Yeah,
yourself. Maybe
exactly.
yourself, but more likely
More
him.
likely him. Yeah. No, we were both going down.
If I'm going down, you're going with me. And then you roll down the steps and then get killed by the psycho murderer who broke into your basement.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this next point that I'm going to go to, I'm just going to start it off with saying that it's kind of jargon heavy, and
Gotcha.
I don't think smart enough to follow this whole thing, but the part that I did understand was definitely interesting. So I'm going to read it mostly verbatim. That way I don't fuck it up by misrepresenting what they're saying. Okay, but so the two people who are behind this belief, I guess I could say, they're Neil Dagnall and Keith Drinkwater. So those are a couple of dope last names.
Yeah, I wonder what Keith does.
All right, listen. I just noticed a typo in this article. The heading says Keith Drinkwater, and when it tells what he does and where he works, it says Ken Drinkwater. So I don't know which one's right. Should I Google it real quick?
Which one shows up more often in the article?
They don't. It's their direct quotes. Oh, no. I don't know. Whatever. I'll look into this a little bit more, and I'll just tack it on.
Yeah. Well, every time it comes up, you can just be like, "So Keith or Ken said."
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Our good friend Drinkwater.
Maybe it's Keith.
Yeah, just call him Drinkwater.
Mr. Drinkwater is
Professor.
He
Sir
is
Dr. Drinkwater.
Yeah, he's a senior lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University who studies paranormal belief. Neil Dagnall, whose name is correct in both of them, so I want to assume that's his right name.
Right.
Works in the Applied Cognitive Psychology Department at Manchester Metropolitan University. He researches anomalous psychology and cognitive psychology. And it says his lab is undertaking several projects centering on the belief of the paranormal. Okay, so I am just going to read this like word for word. And then there's probably at some point I'm going to stop and be like, do you guys know what that means? And then we'll see how it goes.
All right.
Okay. So it starts with the survival hypothesis proposes a disembodied consciousness or soul survives bodily death. Seeing ghosts in this context confirms belief in life after death and produces reassurance. Other explanations draw on environmental factors such as electromagnetic fields and infrasound. I don't know what infrasound is.
Infrasound.
Maybe it's
it's how
infrared.
Yeah, it's like how infrared detects heat.
So it's like sound waves that we don't perceive.
Waves, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, that'd be my understanding anyway.
Okay, I think that actually shed a lot of light onto what I'm about to read to you.
Oh, hey, what do you know?
Okay, so then they refer to a Canadian neuroscientist whose name is Michael Persinger. It says he demonstrated that the application of varying electromagnetic fields to the temporal lobes of the brain could produce haunt-like experiences, which they define as perception of a presence, feeling of God, sensation of being touched, etc. Another way that these perceptions can come about are reactions to toxic substances. So people will often experience haunt-like perceptions if they experience prolonged exposure to things like carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, pesticide. So things that are like over time harming your brain, you're more likely to have those haunt-like hallucinations.
Okay.
And then the last thing he says is or they say, I suppose, is perceptual disorientation, is also going to create or demonstrate haunt-like illusions. So things like conflicting sensory motor skills. So he says blindfolded participants performed hand movements in front of their body. A robot imitated the movement in real time by harmoniously touching the participant's back. The synchronized movement of the robot allowed participants to adapt to spatial discrepancy. However, temporal delay between the participant's movement and the robot's touch produced disorientation accompanied by a strong feeling of presence. So from what I understand, that means that if your sensory perceptions are not matching up, then you're more likely to think it's a haunt-like illusion.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I don't know. I thought that one was kind of interesting, but also, man, I guess I didn't understand it that well. When I understood, I was like, oh, that's a good point. But then I was like,
that's a good point. What did I read?
Right. But then the other parts of it, I was like, that was a long ass word. And I could have Googled this at any time.
It's a lot of
but
stuff.
I didn't. I know. Yeah, that was. So then my next one is Terrence Hines. He's a professor of neurology at Pace University, and he's also the author of a book called Pseudoscience and the Paranormal, which I think lets you know how he feels about it.
No, I'm interested to hear this article and find out what he really thinks.
Right. So
Well, the fact that it's pseudoscience and the paranormal.
right. So maybe
they're separate.
Like colon
the
paranormal.
paranormal. That's my book. So he talks about how the human brain has evolved to find patterns, which I think we talked about before. And so he says if you're in the wilderness and you hear something behind you, it's way better to think that it's a lion or a saber-toothed tiger sneaking up on you, to attribute that sound to some agency, something that has purpose. Because if it does have purpose and you run away, you're better off. But if it's just a random noise and you run away, then that doesn't cost you anything. And so I think that's another person just backing up the idea that you are already ingrained with that fight or flight, and it's better to run if you don't know what it is, and then that on top of your own biases are going to make you think that you've seen a ghost. From this point on in the article, I'm going to link the article. I'm not going to read all of them because it will take us a long time. Everybody else pretty much agrees with those. So I am going to finish up with something kind of spooky, though.
Okay.
So this is his example of when your expectations make you inclined to believe a certain way.
Okay.
So he says, some years ago for a term project, one of my students took some people to a local graveyard. In one condition, people were taken to a particular grave and told, this is the grave of some old guy who died in 72 of natural causes. Nothing weird about it. This is late at night, midnight. And they would ask, what do you feel? Are you getting any sensations? And people would said, well, no, not really. And then in the other condition, they took people to the graveyard at about the same time, late at night, and said it was the grave of a teen girl who had died tragically. She'd killed herself after her boyfriend had left her. And she'd said to haunt this grave at midnight on the night in question, and this is the anniversary of her suicide. And people freaked out. They saw her, they heard her, and it was all due to expectations. I'm not saying that the folks who experienced the ghost of this non-existent teenage girl were lying or crazy or hysterical. They weren't. Their brains were just doing what they do. They were using information they were giving, which turned out to be incorrect. And so I think that's really interesting that you are maybe not wrong in experiencing these what they called haunt-like illusions. You feel like you're experiencing that, and so you're not crazy. Your brain's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, but the information you were given was wrong. And so then how you are perceiving and evaluating the situation is then wrong.
Okay. So it's kind of like, like in horror movies, right? Mm-hmm. Where family moves into the new house, and the kids are always the ones to see the ghost first.
Right.
And then, the parents are always like, there's no such thing as ghosts, but, the kids keep telling, more and more detail about these ghosts that they keep seeing, and then the parents start seeing the ghosts.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
So that's probably
a
case
of suggestion.
Yeah, it's probably a case of kids have wild imaginations.
Mm-hmm. They're in a new place. They're not familiar with it.
They don't have a lot of experiences to draw on. So probably they're going to draw on what their imaginations lead them to. And then after being told that so many times, even if rationally you're saying, no, there's no ghost in our house, if you experience something weird, you're going to be like, oh, well, maybe there's a fucking ghost in our house.
Well, hell yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Right. Well, that was awesome.
Yeah,
It did get a little spooky at the end.
I know.
Right.
I know science, man. Like science is scary.
Pseudoscience
scary.
and the
No,
paranormal.
real science.
Well,
is
no, what
pretty
they did was
scary,
real
too. Have you
science.
seen the fucking ocean?
Yeah,
ocean's
the
scary, and
ocean's
that's
scary
That
as
is
shit.
true. Yeah. Hey, well, thank you guys for being on the show today.
Mm-hmm.
You're so welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, listen, and I hope if people believe in ghosts that they want to like tweet mean things at me or something.
Oh, yeah. If you want to tweet mean things at Andy, just do it at Anti-Fiction on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or
'Cause
at Anti-Fiction-Cast.
I'm gonna
is our
print it
handle.
out and put all our hate tweets on the wall or something.
There we go. We're going to frame them.
Yeah.
So you can tweet us and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Anti-Fiction-Cast. You can email us at antifictioncast@gmail.com. And keep checking in. Like say all this month is going to be the spookiest month of anti-fiction ever. We're alternating each week. So this is ghosts, and then next week is possessions, and then ghost possessions, and then we got one more episode of ghosts, which will be on Halloween itself. So keep checking in, keep listening, and we'll see you next week. Ooh.